All right. Well, good morning and happy Sabbath to my panelists and everyone who has tuned in to participate and listen in on our Eastside SCA Fellowship's panel discussion on the Desire of Ages. It's my pleasure to be facilitating the discussion today. My name is Marvin Lee. I'm one of the elders at church and have been around since the very beginning, which we're chatting with this about last week, and it's been 24 years since the church has been around. I'm my day job is an attorney, and I'm just happy to be here with you gentlemen as we talk about the Desire of Ages. I'm going to ask the other panelists to introduce themselves too.
I can go next. Good morning. My name is Esmond Chan, and I've been at Eastside for about a year, so glad to be on the panel today and look forward to the discussion.
Good morning. My name is Danny Kim. I am a visitor of sorts. I've been to the church and have met some friends, and I've been invited this morning to come and be participating in this panel. So glad to be here.
My name is Ted, a member of Eastside Church for the past couple of years. Really excited to be joining this morning. By profession, I'm an IT manager. And with that said, Marvin, I'll hand it back to you.
And today our IT manager and panelist is also doing double duty and taking care of the tech while we have this discussion. So thanks a lot, Ted. Okay, so today's chapter is chapter 67 of the Desire of Ages, and the title of the chapter is Woe on the Pharisees. The title says it all. Really, Jesus speaks in very clear, very harsh, very serious tones and imagery about the Pharisees, and not just talking about them critically, but saying that woe unto them. They are because of their attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. They are facing some real reckoning because of how they abuse the people around them and really mischaracterize who God is. So we're going to jump right in, and I'm going to talk. I'm going to read the first question for the discussion, and it's this. The Pharisees, Jesus told the people, "But do not ye after their works, for they say and do not." Why is hypocrisy like this so corrosive in a leader or authority figure? Can you think of an example from your experience or from the public sphere?
I'll jump in first on that one, Marvin. And oh, wow. Like just before Sabbath school, I was just trying to, refresh my mind of examples in our society of famous leaders who have demonstrated hypocrisy. And I did just a quick Google search, and oh my word, pages on pages on pages of famous leaders. And I'm going to stay out of politics this morning, but I mean, we all can think of leaders that appeared to be on an upward trajectory, great, doing great things for the country. And then, it turns out that they were not doing great things, and, the implosion of their careers and, the people and, the reputation, not just of themselves, but of the governmental organizations that they represent. I mean, even just this past week, the mayor of New York City was indicted on a corruption charge. And obviously, that still is being sorted out and has to go to trial. But it's so impactful in our society, and it's so prevalent, but it's also, unfortunately, something that we see in our church as well. And I can think of two ways I've personally seen this play out. One of them is think of it as the explosion, when you have a church leader who has some scandal come forward, or some very visible hypocrisy that's brought forward, and it can explode, and it can wipe out entire congregations, and it can be so damaging to the people involved. And then the other way I think about it is it can also be a corrosive element, where instead of, this being something that's big and, all at once, you can have hypocrisy shown by leaders over time. And it can be just this negative corrosive effect that can, really wear down people's belief, not just in, the church, of the people, in the institution, but even of their faith. I can speak of friends that have left, that are no longer Christians because of what they have seen within the church and how that is tolerated by our community. So I'll hand it off to others. We could talk about this one for hours, I'm sure.
Yeah, a few thoughts from had in my mind when I read this was, hypocrisy. It's the intention to deceive, and or in a being in a church or being Christians. I mean, that by itself, that doesn't bring people to God. I mean, that pushes people away. And yeah, I mean, to Ted's point, that pushed me away for a long time. So, it's a reality, and it becomes really, it's dysfunctional. It creates a really dysfunctional environment because there's no trust. Trust is the basic, principle that guides, all our relationships. And, like us, it's really an issue.
Sometimes parents will be criticized because how they interact with their children can be summed up, hey, do as I say, but not as I do. So to me, besides the, on the face hypocrisy of that, the reason why that's so damaging is whatever the advice or the rule or the prescription or the principle that the parent is telling the child to live by basically becomes completely robbed of its meaning and its value, right? Because the child says, well, if that was so true, then you would also do it, right? But what I think is even more damaging is the relationship between the parent and the child, because what then the children see is that they're saying, all right, you're not building a household of values and beliefs that have integrity or principle behind it. You just have these rules that you're pressing down upon me because it works out for you. Because behind the scenes, you do the exact same thing that you're telling me not to do, right? So then it becomes an authoritarian type of relationship and not one of, oh, mom and dad love me and they're trying to teach me how I should live for my best good. And so it's just, it's just horribly damaging. And especially, like some have said, for new Christians. And that's why the Bible goes so far as to say, look, if church leaders are creating stumbling blocks, especially for new Christians, for baby Christians, it's better for that church leader to have a millstone tied around their neck and toss in the water, because the Bible recognizes how amplified, how much more intense, right, this kind of behavior is on the part of leaders. Because then a baby Christian or someone who doesn't have the foundation of the truth or understand that, hey, we're all sinners and we have to follow God's example, Christ's example, not this leader, they can just easily reject it all and then maybe spend years or the rest of their lives away from church. So, please,
sorry.
Danny, go ahead.
Some interesting points came out to me is that hypocrisy is not a trait per se. It's a symptom of human nature. It's something that it's part of us, and it kind of comes from what we are or who we are, really. And I think it goes to the core of every single one of us, who we are as a person, and we start making up what we are, and we start creating I guess, things in our lives or just levels in our lives or traits in our lives that justify our own existence, justify who we are as people. And that trait, unfortunately, I think Jesus spoke well. If we're founded on sand per se, if we create this structure of what we are, ultimately it fails us because we're not who, we're a what. And as long as we're a what, it's hard to be a what because you have to create all these different structures to be a person. And Jesus fundamentally says, it doesn't matter what you are, it's who you are I'm interested in. And that to me is just a kind of a fundamental kind of a thought process. Like, it's not what I do or what I say, or that doesn't define me. It's who I am that defines me. And what interesting to me, lastly, is why is hypocrisy so resentful? Why do we look so down on it? Because we're all hypocrites in some way or some fashion. We all pretend to be something else we're not at times. But why do we find that so offensive? What about hypocrisy make us go like, oh, I'm not going to church, or I'm not going to do this, or this person bothers me? It's very interesting to me how when we see hypocrites, we're like, wow, but we're all it, and why we are so offended by it. When, to be honest with you, we're all hypocrites. None of us really know who we are. We're all pretending to be something that we're not. And I think Jesus is getting to the core. Says, let's become who. I'm here to be who, not a what. And the Pharisees has to me defined of what it means to be a earthly human being, and Jesus is just shattering it.
All right. Let's move on to question number 2. The author writes, the Pharisees enjoined a multitude of regulations, having their foundation in tradition and unreasonably restricting personal liberty. Why is this contrary to God's will for us? How do we balance what is a reasonable versus an unreasonable restriction of personal liberty as it relates to religious practice and observances?
So I'll start on this one, Marvin. First thing that comes to mind is, Jesus said his burden is light, and it's a heavy burden, like what the Pharisees was doing. And religious rules, even today, it can become so burdensome. It's focused so much on it, we really lose the whole picture, the big picture of why we're doing it in the first place, of why we're Christians and why we behave certain ways or try to strive, for a higher standard. But just, really just, nitpicking the little things, or even judging others for, hey, you didn't do this, or why you're not doing that. Really just distracts from the bigger picture and does not reflect the character of Christ and God, which is love. And the other point to me is, is also a reminder to how important, of how important it is to develop a personal relationship with God versus, blindly following, religious leaders, authority. That hasn't changed to this day. So, God's invitation is there every single day for us. And then my last point is, these rules, the people become so burdened with them that they just don't have freedom to develop a relationship themselves with God, or freedom to do what the Holy Spirit inspires them to do, because they're so burdened by, this is exactly, step by step, sort of the checklist of what you have to follow.
Yeah. I don't think we often associate this term or this concept of personal liberty, right, with being Christians or with God's law, right? Why do you think? How do you respond to Ellen White? This is to the whole panel, talking about criticizing, the Pharisees because what they were doing was restricting personal liberty.
So I'm going to come at this from a little bit of a different angle. I think we can see with the Pharisees, and I think we also can point to our own very recent history, the focus on tradition. You know, it was right there in the beginning of your question, right? Getting at the heart of why we do what we do and why we say don't do this. And I think we can look at what the Pharisees were doing, and they were so focused on tradition. They were so focused on, we do this because this is what we have always done, that they had lost sight of the purpose of why God had asked us to do certain things. And again, I don't want to just sound like, oh, wow, yeah, look, you know, the Pharisees, haha, we don't do that anymore. Like, oh my word, growing up, you know, I think we could all think of traditions that we had, and, you know, within different faith communities, you know, the things that we do just because we don't, you know, we've always done them this way. And that can also, you know, going back to the point that we were talking about related to hypocrisy, that can also become a corrosive element if we don't inspect and if we don't stay true to the foundation of, hey, this is why we do these things, because we want to build a closer faith relationship with Christ, or because we want to show through our lives that this is, you know, how we demonstrate God's love to others, versus, oh no, we just don't do that because we don't do that. And it's amazing to see generationally, you know, Marvin, you mentioned earlier, you know, parents and children, you know, especially in generational things, you know, as my kids, they pick up on this right away, both in the context of, you know, things that are, you know, spiritual traditions and things that are not. You know, that immediate question of, are we just doing this because we do it, or is there a deeper reason?
Yeah, people often identify cultural Seventh-day right?
Yeah.
You look and you act and you talk like a Seventh-day, but you know, either there's an absence of or even a rejection of kind of the core doctrinal tenets of, you know, of our beliefs. But it's like, oh, this is what I grew up with. This is,
Yeah.
you know, without kind of, you know, Danny kind of talked about the what of being a Christian versus the who, right?
You know, we may not be asking people to do the things the Pharisees were, but, you know, let's make sure we're continuing to stay true and continuing to look at the heart of what our faith is. And sorry, Danny, didn't mean to interrupt you. Go
No,
ahead.
no, so absolutely. You know, it's interesting is that I think we need to understand that we as Christians, we're an outlier. If you step out of Christianity, this is what religion is. I mean, really, go to any other religion of the world, this is what religion is. It's forms and rules and practice, and this is how you please God. Christianity is a total contradiction to what religion is. My perspective, I don't like religion, to be honest with you. I don't like religion because in religion, to me, it's always been about control and telling people what to do and how to live and pay your taxes and pay your offering to me. And Jesus, what he did was just annihilate what the world created as religion. And this whole relational thing, it's an outlier. I mean, what other belief system has a God dying for his? It's a mind-blowing concept. And I think as Christians, we kind of forget what a different system that our belief system is. It's not worldly. The world has a total different system. And the world has rejected religion because of that, of hypocrisy. And Jesus was the ultimate honest and true person, which blew everyone away.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought this up because this kind of connects to what Ellen White's talking about God values and protects and honors our personal liberty, right? Because I do believe that religion at its core is about societal control. And that's why, you know, that's why enlightened or the progressive Western mind has rejected so much of religion. Almost the entire continent of Europe, where, you know, the Christian church kind of started. But of course, within Christianity, we've had total epics of apostasy and false, you know, religion take over the entire church. And you know that's happening when personal liberty disappears and when the church is being utilized as a form of societal control, right? So to me, I think this idea of personal liberty is so crucial that when we see personal liberty disappearing and are being forced to conform out of fear, right? Because isn't that what legalism and righteousness by works, isn't that what the core of that is? Then, that's the red flag. And we should say that's not God's character. Let's examine this and see and recognize that there's apostasy, at the core. And that's exactly what the Pharisees were doing, right? Through these onerous rules and regulations, they were using it to control the people under their thumb. This is great, but we got to move on. Number 3, the Pharisees loved outward recognition of position and rank as evidenced in their garments and their questing after the most honorable seats at feasts. Have you seen modern day equivalents of this in churches? And what are the signs of a healthy versus an unhealthy church in this regard?
You know what? This story was interesting. The widow and the 2 mites, whatever. And Jesus says, she gave more than anyone. And we always took it spiritually, like, oh yeah, spiritually she gave more. But actually, in reality, she gave more because of her sacrifice, of what she did. Millions and millions and millions of dollars have come into the churches because of that her spirit, and I'm like, oh wow, it's true. In reality, what she started was a giving of the heart, rather than giving of I matter per se. We kind of think, oh, I matter. I could give something to the church. Not really. God matters. And we give because God wants to touch our heart, to be honest with you, God doesn't need a penny from us per se. He owns the mountains and the cattle and everything else in between. But what's interesting is that he allows us to be part of his flow, I guess, what I call flow of the blessings, that what he gives us, that we give to others. And that, yeah, the paradigm here is just so incredible. And to me I'm still racking my brain on this one, what paradigm God is unleashing on us, especially about money and how it can be a blessing to us and others.
Yeah, the absolutely, money is necessary and it's a tremendous blessing, but the Bible it's the love of money, right? That is the root of evil, and I think that's kind of what this question. I hope and I believe it's not so much the case at Eastside, but I think I may have shared this story with people before. I have a friend I met through pickleball. He's very, very wealthy. He owns a string of dental offices. And he said his parents started out as just very humble and, members of a church. And what happened though is as he got more and more wealthy, I mean, way more wealthy than, anyone in this room, it kind of changed them, right? So they started asking for an allowance, and then they were retired, and then they started asking for big sums of money because the church they attended, every week there's a bulletin, and at the back page of the bulletin, there's a listing of all the financials. But it's not just, hey, this is our church budget, this is what we need to build a church, or hey, we're trying to fund this mission trip or something. It basically would put in big, bold, attention grabbing format, which church member had given the most that month.
Ow.
Right. And so there was always this one-upmanship with other wealthy church members. And so my friend's parents kept on pressuring him, look, we need more money because we want to be on the back of the bulletin. And my friend is a rejected church, no wonder. But it's giving into this filial piety, he's Korean, of like giving his parents this, and he himself is telling me this story, it's so outrageous, but it's almost like you saw this transformation of the parents because they bought into this idea of the rank and the prestige and obviously the church clearly rather than trying to recognize that, maybe look at the story from the Bible, they're actually amplifying that and manipulating it so that there's more and more wealth coming into the church. So to me, the remarkable thing about the story was that the parents weren't always like that. When they didn't have a lot of money, they didn't have, and so you think of the parents, oh, they're wise, stuff, but here people, so they must be in their, 60s, 70s or whatever, just, literally becoming, corrupted, not even by their own money, but by their son's money, their access to it, so that they could play this fame game. All right, let's move on. Number 4, Jesus uses some of the strongest words of condemnation. Ye shall receive greater damnation, in reference to the scribes and Pharisees devouring widows' houses. Why was this practice so harshly condemned, and what are some modern day equivalents in our society?
On this one, Marvin, widows back in that time is, had very little, and certainly probably don't have rights in courts to represent themselves at times, and so they're seeking, an expert in the law, in this case Pharisees, to adjudicate for themselves, and with the trust that they will do whatever is in their best interest. So, but they didn't, and the Pharisees, is using, again, religion, or and using the name of God to intentionally do self-serving evil deeds, getting after people's properties for their own benefit. So betraying positions of trust, I think, is, it's, and we all are sinful, and it's easy to kind of forget that sometimes, we do some of those behaviors as well, not, maybe to some extent, not, and then, modern day things, what struck me was the recent, several years, and what we've seen in incidents regarding the police, right? How, the police is meant to protect people, but yet they harm them. So it's really, from that perspective, I think it's very corrosive.
This reminded me, a few years back in our family, there was an elderly person who was being taken advantage of. And there are scammers, and there are gross, horrible human beings who prey on the elderly. As they, age, they were becoming less able to discern, for medical reasons, that hadn't led to the point where they, couldn't live on their own. They couldn't discern that they were being scammed. And, it is such an abuse of a vulnerable population. And I think here we have another scenario. You have some of the most vulnerable people in a society. I mean, at a level we can't even comprehend, like Esmond was calling out, like the widows, were at the bottom of the totem pole. They didn't have the social security, the safety nets that we do now. And here's people in positions of trust that are abusing them, taking advantage of them. And it's heartbreaking, and again, the perversion of justice. Here are the religious leaders, the spiritual beacons for the community, that are taking advantage of their position and not showing that love and the care for the vulnerable that is so foundational to God's love.
there's a common theme, right, with what Jesus is calling out the Pharisees about in the most harshest terms. And in it, Jesus is the most harsh in condemning exploitative actions toward the weakest members of society.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in America we've got the progressive income tax, right? So if you make less, then you pay a smaller percentage of your wealth. But if you make more, that percentage, once you reach a certain point, then it gets greater. And I remember growing up thinking that's not fair. If you make more money, then you're actually giving more money to the government in terms of actual dollars than people who are making less. Right? And I was like, oh, there should just be some flat, rate or something like that. And so we tend to think, oh, the poor are being taken care of in America, at least, with just the idea of the progressive income tax, or we think about, welfare or social services and things like that. But, the more closely you look at, policy in capitalistic societies, what is capitalism, right? It's wealth engendering wealth. And then you look at society, you look at politics, and I see a common theme that it's the most vulnerable. It's those with the least. It's those with with the least ability to defend themselves that are exploited, whether it's through certain policies, financial or otherwise, or even in demonizing, certain populations who are the most vulnerable. And that to me, this verse, this chapter speaks to that. And again, it's kind of like a red flag that says, what's going on here? Is it the powerful, those with wealth, trying to help those who need it? Or is it the powerful exploiting the weakest members of society to increase their wealth, to increase their power? And that's why I think this question and this chapter is even so compelling for us today. All right, number 5 is this next question. Why is it more of a blessing to give than to receive? Please share an example from your life.
I've been waiting for this one. So
Awesome.
we've been talking about things that really get my my anger boiling. We're talking about injustice. And this is a really different topic, and it's something that it's so fun to look at this foundational concept, that Christ is talking about here, and we are just now beginning to really understand, just how deep this concept goes, like how deep our human brains are wired to give. And we look at I was doing some research on this. It's so powerful, this giving instinct that we have. It's so deeply wired into our brain that it releases oxytocin, serotonin, and dopamine, and it boosts our mood, and it reduces, our cortisol, our stress hormone levels. And it's not just a thing that we do. It's something that literally makes our lives better, that increases our health. And here we talk about it both in terms of the spiritual impact that it has on us, recentering, helping us to focus on what matters, to give to others, to help our community, to boost, to protect the vulnerable, to boost those up. But it's literally making us healthier and happier. And it goes so deep into who we are and how God has made us. And I think that's so cool. And it's just one of those things that we are just now barely beginning to understand as we start to figure out how our brains work.
Yeah, I do love that this kind of shift, right? Because the first several questions were like getting outraged by hypocrisy or the abuse of power. Uh, but I don't even know if that's from the Bible, but certainly the concept is, right? Uh, it's better to give than to receive. But I love, Ted, that you've actually talked about the physiological benefits
Yeah.
uh, of giving. How about the rest of the panel? Any thoughts on this?
I was reminded of and it was this happened to me many years ago where I was getting breakfast at McDonald's in the morning with my kids, and then there was sort of there was a bunch of people waiting. It was a long queue, and then there was sort of it's like a homeless person, made a gesture to me to get him food, sort of not in a respectful manner, and I was just kind of turned off with the long lines, not in the right line, and it's just not natural. It just turned me off, and I refused to buy him any food, and the interesting part, just about Ted is saying, that bothered me for a long time,
Hmm.
long time, months, years,
Mm.
and then when I think back, it's not that I'm doing it. If I did, buy him something, it wasn't for him, it's for me. I'm doing it for me. So just having the opposite effects of what Ted just explained. So it was a big eye-opening lesson to me. Like it's just gifts. So so the next time somebody came up to me, I was at Panda Express. This guy came up to me and, "Can you get me something?" I got him a full meal, a drink, extra appetizers,
Pot stickers.
fire pot stickers, went all out. So it's anyways, an example of how much giving versus not giving when somebody's asking. It's really made a huge difference.
And it pushes against our selfish nature. It forces us to have those introspective moments, to question our own motivations. Why are we doing the things that we do? And it's such a powerful lesson that we see, again, like we talk about here in our lesson today, and in these examples from Christ. But when we look at this concept of giving, of serving others, I mean, it's woven so deeply throughout the Bible.
Yeah, people, you hear about stories that they're just tremendously super wealthy. Um, there's usually a lot of times it's kind of rags to riches kind of story, and maybe they were like so scarred by their poverty, right, that it just drove them to just tremendous lengths. But if you get wealthy, you want to get more wealthy.
Mm.
And if the end is the wealth, then great wealth is never enough. You just want greater wealth, right? So I think this idea that God's trying to teach us is something that saves us, from ourselves, and from the cellular level to the emotional psyche to the relational level. There's all sorts of blessings. Let's go a little bit deeper into that. This is question number 6. The story of the poor widow who sought to surreptitiously give her 2 mites delves even deeper into this lesson. We might say it's better to give anonymously than to give publicly. And why can this be true?
I think, speaking to what Ted just said, we had to suppress that selfish desire to be that what again. And there's that temptation to get that recognition, as you said, Marvin, about your friend's parents, and how dangerous that can be to our core, when we're constantly looking to see what people think of us, or what kind of value we have in the eyes of man. And giving just kind of encapsulates that, and Jesus says we need to fight that urge, and when we don't get the praise, when we don't get the attention, we're like, oh, no one noticed, but God did, and that's the most important thing, right? And that's an important concept for us, for me especially, just kind of keep my mind like, it's not about what people are clapping their hands or giving me praise. What can I honor God with what I'm doing? And I guess to me, that's the essential here, that the widow really showed, it's not about the outside things. It's just between her and God, and as it should be. And then we need to be mindful of that.
Yeah, I think God puts in our heart, he wants willing and happy service. Like, he doesn't want service as a transactional dynamic between him and us. And he certainly doesn't want us to serve him out of fear. And you see, I think the greatest example of this is Saul, who became Paul, right? The transformative experience he had, where he's confronted by the very person that whose people he's persecuting, and there's that, in that moment, that recognition, oh, everything that he justified, oh, this is like a false Messiah and all this stuff, it comes crashing on him. He realizes that he was persecuting the Son of God, right? But even so, he's redeemed. And from that moment on, everything he could give, he gave with a happy heart, right? He went to became just an itinerant, missionary. And so, when I think we give most happily and most freely when we recognize, right, that the gift we've been given is so unmerited, and it's everything, right? But we're humans too, and we still have this sinful core, right? So you might start out with the idea of, oh, I want to happily give because of everything that God's given to me, right? But if your name ends up on the back of the church bulletin, there's this big sum, right? And then, oh wow, people come up to you after church. Wow, that's so generous of you. Oh wow, you must be doing so well. And then, like my friend's parents, you might even start out the right place, but but this corrosive influence of sin and so forth. So, that's this story, I think is so multifaceted, right? About the widow. It's part of it is to call out the Pharisees who are making this big ostentatious show of it, and then praising, the widow, but also to protect us, right, from these corrosive influences.
And one last thing, what you mentioned is interesting, Marvin, how that attitude with money changed them. That's fascinating to me.
Yeah.
Just our attitude towards money changes us. Wow, that's just huge.
Yeah, and the same can happen, right? With if we kind of will wake up and recognize that all blessings that have been bestowed upon us are from God, right? And if we constantly kind of recognize that, then God can safely bless us more, right? And not put at peril our own souls, right? And we can do more, and we can serve Him more with a happy heart, and not go down that slippery slope. If we can just kind of always remember that. Praise God, from whom all blessings flow. Right? All right, number 7. Jesus pointed out that the scribes and Pharisees had omitted the weightier matters of the law: judgment, mercy, and faith. So as Christians, how should we value and live by these matters: judgment, mercy, and faith?
Oh man, I'll jump in on this one. When I first saw this question, the immediate thing that popped into my head is Micah 6:8. He has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. And it's not an exact one-to-one parallel, but I think there's so much alignment there. And this is so foundational to the subversion that Christ was doing of how the Pharisees were approaching everything. Is our goal here to be judgmental of others? Our goal is, like in Micah 6:8, to love justice, and to act justly ourselves. And, the idea of bringing mercy to the table, in a way where we look at not just those who deserve what we have to give them, but that we can be merciful to them. And the way that Christ talks about mercy and the forgiveness that he brings, which is just so against how we as humans typically approach those around us. And faith, that the emphasis on works, the emphasis on outward displays, the emphasis on the tradition versus what is at the core of everything. And it's our faith. It's our deeper connection to God. And it's just such a foundational subversion, or flipping everything that the Pharisees had been living and showing and teaching on its head.
One of my favorite verses of the Bible, from Micah. We're talking about the Pharisees, right, who were clearly just oppressors of the people around them. So I found it interesting that in this portion of the chapter, and in these words from Jesus, he doesn't simply say, right, that the Pharisees have omitted mercy. He also says the Pharisees have omitted judgment as well as mercy and faith. What are your thoughts about that?
I think, in all the burdensome rules and, under the religion, the focus is on keeping those rules as opposed to what we're talking here, judgment, mercy, and faith. And when I think about judgment, 100%, agree in terms of being just. I also think about judgment in terms of how easy it is for us to judge others. In many different interactions in our daily lives. When somebody does us wrong, we want to get back. When something is, it's a natural inclination to want to fight back. But that's where, kind of mercy comes in. It's undeserved grace. And to understand that's what God has given to us. Also, and to know that there are quite a lot of things in life that the battle does not belong to us, it belongs to God, and to recognize that He will fight our battles for us.
One of the best descriptors of Jesus that I've heard is that he's both just as well as a justifier. So if it was just mercy and you remove justice, then it's basically lawlessness, right? Hey, just, a kind of laissez-faire attitude about everything. Hey, just let everyone do what they want, right? But if there was no justice, right, then the wicked acts of oppression that Jesus is calling out, for the Pharisees, right, there'd be no recourse. And I think that those are twin elements uh, of God's governance of the universe, right? Justice and mercy. You can't really have mercy if there's no justice to, hold people to account. I think being judgmental is what the Pharisees were excellent at, and probably a lot of Christians, and especially Seventh-day Adventists. But it's just it's interesting that Jesus says, look, we have to, the weighty matters of the law are not necessarily the letter of the law, but the judgment, but justice, the actual substance of the law, because that's what the Pharisees were forgetting about. All right, let's go to number 8. The author points out that by condemning the scribes and Pharisees' onerous and burdensome exacting of the tiniest of tithes, even on herbs, Christ condemns the abuse of sacred obligation, but the obligation itself he does not set aside. How do we understand the obligation of tithe to be both right and good, as well as a blessing to the tither?
So it reminds me of last week's lesson where Pharisees and the Herodians were putting a trap for Jesus and asking him, should we pay the imperial tax to Caesar or not? And this, asked for a coin and told them, give back to Caesar what belongs to him, and give back to God what belongs to God. And in that last week's lesson, Danny had pointed out that we, in terms of what, we are made in the image of God. So, we belong to God. And, obligation of tithe is a reminder of that we're made in his image, that we belong to God. And from that perspective, it's really less of an obligation. Maybe, probably flip it around. It's an honor to give back a part of what God has given to us. So it's just a reminder that we of whose we are.
Yeah, I think the issue of tithing, well, certainly it's the potential for abuse and control, right, is there on the part of organized religion and so forth. I think it can be one of the biggest stumbling blocks for those outside the church, or for beginning Christians, right? Because it feels like a tax. It feels like payment, right, for membership, and many times non-Christians will use that as a way to mock or to quote unquote expose, right, organized religion and so forth. But and there are ways that Jesus is actually exposing the Pharisees. They had elaborate systems for mint. They would have these little balances. You make sure you're tithing even like the herbs that come into your home, and that was yet another way to show how righteous they were and so forth. But clearly he doesn't condemn tithing, which started even before the nation of Israel began. And to me, the idea of tithing besides the practical implications of how do you run an effective and impactful church organization, I think the greatest blessing is actually on the tither, right? To be able to be asked to give and to happily give a significant but not overwhelming portion of the wealth that God's blessed with, that God's blessed you with.
It always impresses me, Marvin, how many helps that God has put in our lives, and tithe is such an important help in our life, love of money can really get seated in our heart and can really change us in a negative way. And how tithe, I've seen it all too often, how when we trust God with our money, God takes care of us, and even more so. But even more than that, God really helps us to kind of figure out it's not about money. It's not about our wealth. It's about God who gives that wealth. And that little attitude change just kind of helps us. Money's a big stressor for people. It's a huge stressor for 99% of the world. And God has blessed his people with a kind of a peace that wherever you're at with money, I'll take care of it. And we just give our tithe. And what a blessing it is. Like I said, it's only 10%. God doesn't require like fixed amount, That's a beautiful concept. If you're poor, then you give it what you can. If you're rich, give what you can. It's a beautiful concept.
All right, we only have a few minutes left, so I'm going to just ask, we go around the room. In one sentence, how would you describe the essential character of the Pharisee for which they were Pharisees, for which they were condemned by Christ? As Christ followers today, how do we go about reflecting the character of Christ rather than that of the Pharisee?
One sentence, tough. I would say that the Pharisees and Jesus are final forms of what good practice or bad practice ends up being. The Pharisees perfected what the world created. Jesus is the perfection of his system. And now we get to look on both of what side we want to stand on.
The Pharisees had, in one short sentence, they had no love for others. They only care about themselves, but God showed the opposite.
I love that.
I'll do even better than one sentence. I'll do one word: selfishness.
So what's the flip side of that?
Christ.
Yeah.
I mean, all of the attributes that we've been talking about as embodied in Christ, giving, mercy, faith, justice, all of the counter examples that we've talked about that he showed through the lesson today.
I love it. Selfishness on one side, selflessness on the other side.
There it is.
Love of selves on the one side, love of others on the other side, right? And we as Christians, as Seventh-day Adventists, we are claiming to be representatives of Jesus Christ. So I think the whole chapter is a good primer for us, a good system to recognize, are we, through our actions and through our words and our behaviors, through our policies, are we showing the world that we're selfish, we love ourselves, and we'll do anything to hold on to power, to wealth, or are we reflecting the character of Jesus Christ, of selflessness, of caring for the weakest, of giving, of reflecting that character of unconditional love? Thank you so much, gentlemen. What a great hour of conversation this was. And I'll remind everyone who's watching, please come worship with us either in person if you're able, or through live stream at Eastside SCA Fellowship. That worship will start in just 1 hour at 11:15. Thanks, everyone.